And we're frozen. We're frozen.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. This is the Aram Public Library, and this is Michelle Carter speaking, the director. And once again, it is Friday, our favorite day of the week, and we have the fabulous UW Extension Office, Walworth County, Master Gardeners. And today they will be focusing on pollinators. So take it away, Julie.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, we are excited to be here, not only because it's Friday, but because this week is National Pollinator Week. So the whole month of June is a designated pollinator month designed to build awareness around our pollinators. But this week in particular is designated as National Pollinator Week. So we are going to be talking to you about pollinators today. So that's always a fun topic to talk about. I have three lovely master gardeners with me. We have Ruth Flesher and Sue Liedl and Mary Mock. So they are available to help answer any gardening questions that you have. And if you have a question, just put it in the chat box on the Facebook. And if you have a question after today, even if you're not viewing the program live, you can drop it in there afterwards. Drop it in there a week later and we'll keep checking those and try to keep answering your questions. Or you could email me directly and I'll put that in the comments too. So if you have any gardening questions or need help with something, please reach out to us. That's what we're here for. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get into it here. So again, I just want to thank Aram Library for hosting. Thank you all for joining us today. We are really excited to be here every week, every Friday at noon to provide some gardening advice and answer some questions. Just a little bit of background about who we are. The University of Wisconsin Division of Extension, it is really our mission to help bring the University of Wisconsin's resources to every inch of Wisconsin. So we really want to connect all of you, all of our local communities with what UW-Madison has as far as those resources and addressing our local issues and statewide issues and even national issues. So we are here to serve our communities. The Master Gardener program is a huge part of that. It's completely volunteer based and our volunteers are here with us today and they complete certification requirements to become a volunteer and they maintain community service volunteer hours as well as continuing education. So Master Gardeners are lifelong learners. They're very knowledgeable, but they are really good at just knowing where to go to find information. That's the main part of being a Master Gardener is knowing where to go to find those answers, even if they don't know the answer themselves, and that's okay. Like I said, we're all learning, we're all growing all the time. And so they're very helpful in finding where to get the resource or some more information or a specialist to help answer our questions. So again, happy National Pollinator Week. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Ruth, to talk about our top 5 this week for pollinators.
Thanks, Julie. So the top 5 things that I want you to know, to learn today about pollinators, if you take away nothing else, I want you to understand a little bit about what the problem is. I would like you to understand who the pollinators are. And I would like you to know about the top 3 things that you can do because you can make a huge difference. So, pollinators are in trouble, number 1. Monarchs, which overwinter in Mexico, the numbers of, and they count them down there in Mexico. There's another place in California and I think one in Florida perhaps as well. But anyway, they've seen a 75 to 80% drop in the number of butterflies that make it down there every year. There's a study from Europe that says 75% of the biomass of all flying insects there's a 70% reduction in that. And then honeybees, you've probably heard about colony collapse disorder. It seems like the statistic that is being put out there now is that beekeepers are losing 30% of their bees every single year. So lots of reasons for it. Some of it is illness, some of it is loss of habitat, some of it's pollution, some of it's climate change, some of it we probably don't even understand. But the basic is it's a problem. And it's important because we need the pollinators, the insect pollinators, because 1 of every 3 bites of food that we eat either comes directly from pollinator activity, things like apples and cranberries and lots of other foods, or indirectly in that they pollinate the crops that feed the animals that provide the dairy and the meat. And also because they support our ecosystems by pollinating the plants that are out there, and without the pollination, the plants won't produce seeds. So we really, really need these pollinators. So the other non-insect pollen, there are a few birds and animals that are also pollinators, but we're going to focus on the insects because they're the most important ones. So who are the pollinators? Bees, because they drink nectar and collect pollen, and because they tend to stick with the same flower on every foraging trip they make, they are the best insect pollinators. So honeybees, bumblebees, there are lots of other native bees as well. But then in addition, butterflies, moths, wasps, flies, beetles, those are all, they all do some pollination as well. So those are who we're talking about here. So how can you help? Everybody's individual gardens make a difference. And the first thing that you can do is be very, very careful about using pesticides. Long and short of it is, please don't kill them. If you can commit to not using pesticides at all, that's best for them. If you have a problem that you feel you need to use a pesticide for, please use it very, very judiciously, very carefully. If you can spray in the evening when the pollinators aren't active, or if you can spray when the flowers aren't open and they're not collecting from those plants at that time, that helps. But always, always, always follow the directions on the label. Okay. The next thing you can do is you can grow bee forage or other pollinator forage. Adult pollinators get their nutrition from nectar and pollen produced by flowers. And if you're talking about butterflies and beetles, excuse me, I'm sorry. Girls.
That's okay, Ruth. That the joy of working from home, right? So I'll just fill in here while Ruth takes care of those naughty puppies. So we want to feed our pollinators, and we often think about just feeding the adults, the butterflies and the bees, but also there's caterpillars out there, and they're the young that need food too. So if we can offer food in our gardens that offer food for the caterpillars and the adults, that is a really good strategy. And Ruth, I see that you're back, so if you
I am. I sent them outside. So when you think about what flowers to plant, you need to think about feeding these insects all season long. So that from the very early part of the spring all the way through the late fall, when they're all active, you need to have hopefully at least 3 things in bloom at any given time. So you want to have a variety of plants as far as the season, a variety of shapes, because different bees and insect pollinators can access different kinds of flowers, and different colors attract different ones. So lots variety in any way you can think of is good. And then the other thing is to provide safe spaces for them to rest and to raise their young. So as the honeybees are the only ones who live in hives, most of the native bees, 70% of them, nest in holes in the ground, and 30% of them nest in cavities, holes or crevices in wood or hollow stems. And these native bees, they don't travel real far, so it needs to be someplace close to your garden. They only go a few hundred yards in their entire lifetime. So those are the top 5 things. We have a problem. These are who they are. Be careful with the pesticides and feed them and give them safe spaces. If you take nothing else away from today, I've done my job.
And Ruth, we have some pictures from another library project that you worked on. Would you mind just telling us about this pollinator garden?
Yeah, we installed a sample pollinator garden at Hedberg Public Library in Janesville. And so the top left picture is before we started, nothing but bare ground with some mulch and the benches. This happens to be within the riverside, the park on the riverside of Hedberg Library, a little just on the south edge of the library. You can see the corner of the library building in the second photo on the top. And we started out with about 20 plants. This is our, right after we planted it, you see lots of mulch there still. And then the bottom picture here is a couple years later. We've got a bunch of things already in bloom. There's some yarrow, there's some monarda, there's some salvia, there's, I think, the remains of some, I think that's a little later in the season. I can't tell if that's, well, anyway. So lots of different kinds of things. We planted a lot of different plants. We did not plant a lot of space for each one because we wanted to show more plants and the space is limited. So these are all samples of good pollinator plants. And you can go ahead and switch to the next slide. And in these, if you look very, very closely, the slide on the left is woods aster. These were taken at the pollinator garden. And I can see a yellow striped beetle just above the center. And if I go just below the center, I can see some honeybees or other bees. I'm not sure if they're honeybees. So lots of insect activity there. And the photograph on the right is a penstemon, and that one's an early spring flowering one. And you can see the bumblebee getting ready to poke his nose into the tubular flower there. So lots of different ways to, lots of different kinds of flowers to help feed the bees.
Thanks, Ruth. And yeah, on that aster on the left, it is a little hard to see, but it is covered in insects. So it's really cool. And I'll mention, I just planted one of these asters because I wanted to have something that bloomed later into the fall, because this one is a good one for that. If I'm not mistaken, it will bloom, in through September and maybe even into early October, depending on the weather. So it's good to have stuff coming all the way from early spring all the way through the fall. Okay. So I am going to post a bunch of links to more information in the comment section. There's going to be additional resources, additional things you can read about. And so I will be posting those links. So please look there. Again, you'll just be able to link on them. It'll bring you right to the website or to the page. I'll just kind of briefly mention this Xerxes Society is a great resource. There's also planting guides for our area and all over the states, actually, regarding pollinators, so you can get some good advice. And also our other documents here that I'm going to post also have planting guides from our learning store and from our horticulture webpage. I'm also going to post my email address if you have any questions after here, and also a link to an evaluation. So we would love to hear feedback. If you don't mind just taking a couple minutes to fill out a brief survey, there will be a link to that. So I know some questions have come in, so we'll start taking a look at those. Again, if you have a comment or a question, just drop it into that comments box and we'll be happy to answer that. I know there was a question that came in about milkweed, and any of you master gardeners, if you want to jump in, how to best propagate milkweed. I know there's some different varieties of milkweed for our area that are really good for pollinators. And do you have any plants that you are, any favorite ones that you favor for the monarchs or the bees, anything like that?
Go ahead, Sue.
Go ahead, Ruth. It's okay.
No, you go ahead. I've been talking, you talk.
The best way that I have learned just by people talking to me about propagating milkweed is that you take the actual milkweed pod and you wait for it to dry out a little bit, and then where you want that milkweed spread out, you spread the seed in that area. Pretend that you're Mother Nature doing it, because that's exactly what Mother Nature does. So that's the best way that I've learned. And you just let it go. It's its own thing.
I have propagated it from seed myself. The trick to milkweed, if you want to propagate it from seed, is that it requires a certain cold period. It requires, it's either 10 days or 30 days, and it might be 30. But you put it on some potting soil and you moisten it, and then it needs cold but not freezing temperatures for 30 days before it will sprout. That's called stratification, that cold treatment. So Mother Nature does a fine job of it all on her own, but if you want to plant some seeds, that's the trick to getting them to sprout. As far as varieties go, there's the common milkweed, which I have tons of. I've got 2 acres here on the edge of Whitewater. And it's planted itself, and it does a fine job of spreading all on its own. But I also have some of what's known as butterfly weed. Anything in the Latin name is Asclepias, Asclepias. So the butterfly weed is Asclepias tuberosa, and it comes in bright orange and bright yellow. That's good for if your soil is a little drier. If your soil is a little more moist, you might look for something called swamp milkweed, which can take more moisture in the soil.
I have one of the orange ones. I have one of the butterfly weeds, and it is just starting to be full bloom right now, and it's gorgeous. It's one of my favorite ones, and it's done really well in our garden. So and it just keeps getting a little bit bigger every year. So it's beautiful. It's one of my favorites. Let's see. What is the purple flower? Oh, the purple flower from the picture was an aster. Wood,
specifically, it's Woods aster.
Mm-hmm.
It's a slightly different variety than some of the taller ones. It's very short. It's and I think that's why they're so popular. It's like 10 inches tall.
Mm-hmm.
And it has spread from being like 2 or 3 plants to being 3 square feet. So
give it some space. And, you know, here's a question that I've been asked a lot: where to get plants, where to buy, whether they're perennial plants or whatever. But if you're really trying to put in a pollinator garden, where are maybe some local sources to put in to get plants from?
Well, I know I've gotten a lot of my plants through the FFA. Well, I'm here in Lake Geneva area, so I use the greenhouses that the FFA support and grow, and they're always, Larry Plapp is always so knowledgeable about the planning, coming up with issues with it, and he's always welcoming to hearing how things work for you too. So it's great, and it's a wide resource using through him.
there are some online nurseries for native plant nurseries that you can order from that are reputable. There's also a native plant nursery in the Evansville area called Agricol, which does some open greenhouse sales, but you can also order from them as well. The Rock County Conservationists have in the past done a sale of native plants in the those are all as well, and there's you can also look at the farmers markets and just ask the suppliers, are these native plants? And they're usually very knowledgeable about what they're growing and what they're providing.
Great advice. And Mary, just to clarify, can you tell us what the FFA is for those that might not know?
Well, actually, I'm not quite even sure what FFA stands for anymore. It used to stand for Future Farmers of America, but I know that has changed. But they're still a very strong of course, into the agricultural end of it. And it's a wonderful program for high school students that maybe don't live on farms or anything.
And I think most of the high schools, or at least most of our local high schools, have programs with their students where they're working. I know some of the ones in Walworth County that, like you mentioned, have greenhouses that they're raising plants out of and then doing plant sales and doing things locally too. I know for some of us that are in the Walworth County area, you might be familiar with Northwind Perennial Farm as well. That's another just source. You know, we're not recommending one nursery over another or anything like that, but just some sources to check out whether they're online or in person and supporting our local businesses too. But I know Agricol is great. The FFA groups are great. Plant sales. Northwind has a lot of things that they've been offering too. And there's a lot of resources online to find more information about what to plant in your own gardens. Keeping in mind, of course, what type of space you have, what type of soil you have, if it's a sunny location or a shady location, or what other considerations you might have. Let's see if any other questions come in. I don't know if anybody else has other tips from their own garden that they want to share. Something that has worked really well for you.
What's your favorite native plant? Do you have a favorite? Sue?
You're muted, Sue.
Sorry, thank you. I'm thinking right now just of my purple asters that I've got, and I just bought some beautiful lupins, different colored ones from Burlington Garden Center. You know, and only because I know that lupins are really good pollinators, you know, pollinating loving plants.
They are, but I've found them quite challenging to grow.
Yes. and they too, they like to propagate on their own if they want.
And Mary,
So
do you have
favorites.
a favorite?
Oh boy, I have so many favorite flowers, but my yard is more of a woodland, shady area. So I am a lot of my plants you see more in the springtime before all the trees come into blossom or leaf out. And probably at that point, then I have to look at the trilliums and oh boy, it's very hard to say because I have so many woodland flowers. I am lucky that I have a very small spot now that I was able to get the native butterfly weed growing after many attempts, and finally it's taken and it's really doing very well where it's at. So don't give up on a plant if it just doesn't do it the first time. I'd have to say that for sure.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. I think if I were to list a favorite native flower, I think I would say cardinal flower right now. They're such a bright red, and they do well in part shade, and they need a lot of moisture though to do well, but they're glorious.
And the hummingbirds love those, right?
Yes.
Yeah, hummingbirds love red. So I've been wanting, that's on my list of plants to get for my yard is the cardinal flower. So a question did come in. Should any special things be planted or accommodations be made for monarchs to create a fly through? I think in general, just offering them flowers and, you know, some habitat and some flowers, but if there's any specific recommendations?
Something that confused me is that they say that monarchs only eat plants in the milkweed family. And but then I saw an adult butterfly on something else. So the correct phrase would be that the caterpillars will only eat plants in the monarch family. The adults get nectar from lots of flowers. So once again, I would say if you can avoid spraying, do that. And if you can plant and find some plants in the milkweed family that you like, that you're happy with, like the butterfly weed or the native milkweed, which is, you know, those are both very easy enough to find. The swamp milkweed, there's a whorled milkweed. I mean, there's about 17 or 18 plants in the milkweed family, of which 4 or 5 are fairly easy to grow here in Wisconsin, depending on the exact circumstances of your plants.
I would just off of that comment too mention it's good to have variety. Milkweeds are great, especially for the larval stages. But I noticed with my butterfly weed, the orange one, it's blooming right now. I noticed last year it did bloom again in August, but it doesn't bloom real late. The August bloom was a few little flowers came through, and that was like, oh, this is so cool. But we want to see if we can have some flowers blooming late in the season too, before the monarchs go back on their trip, right? And so they can fuel up.
Yep.
So there's always a lot of attention to milkweed. I feel like milkweed is fantastic and it's important, but we also want to offer variety and things that bloom after the milkweed's done. I've noticed my common milkweed that just comes up everywhere in my yard too, and in my garden, it's becoming a little weedy. It's blooming right now too. So
Yeah.
We want to make sure. If here's another question, if you have some acreage and wish to plant large quantities of milkweed or pollinator plantings, is there a source to consult with and how to do this? So talking about a large area.
The challenge with starting a large area is to do as a pollinator area, a pollinator prairie or whatever you want to call it, is getting out the old weeds. And so, and all of the commercial people will tell you that's really, really important to have a successful planting. So I guess I think I would tend to start not with a huge acreage to begin with if you want to do it yourself. I think if you wanted to do a really large area at one time, I would recommend looking for someone to help you. And there are lots of folks out there who will do that. But if you want to do it yourself, I'd start small and expand it slowly.
Yeah, that's what I was going to emphasize, is that you start small and you just keep increasing slow and steady, because the key is to try and keep the weeds under control at the same time. And you also got to keep track of your local ordinances, because if something that's weedy to you may be weedy to somebody else. So you have to make sure that they understand that this is going to become a pollinator corridor, if you will, and that it really shouldn't be tampered with too much. The other thing too that we got to keep in mind is that actually a lot of our lawns are not pollinator friendly, because we keep them so pristine and so clean. You know, early in the season we are out there battling the dandelions. They're part of the pollinators. So
right, that's another great mention, is if you can become a little bit more tolerable of those what we call weeds in our lawns, because the dandelions and the clover, those also provide food, especially earlier in the season for when the bees are just starting to come. Maybe not mowing right away, not spraying right away, things like that. So if you can tolerate the clover growing, yes, let it grow. I know my husband doesn't like the clover, but we also kind of let it grow at the beginning and kind of not be mowing too frequently. And that ties in with lawn care too. And we're going to talk about lawn care in a couple of weeks, about when to mow, how often to mow, things like that, because that can help keep your lawn healthy too. So a lot of keeping our lawns healthy is also about how we take care of it, just with the mowing and watering and stuff like that. So definitely there are some resources I can post too about turning your lawn into a pollinator friendly lawn and planting some other things in the lawn that can also act not quite as grass, but can still be cut short, can still offer food, but it's not completely turf grass. There is a great resource from the University of Minnesota, and I will post that in the comments too. So if you're looking for more information about what to do about your lawn, especially if you're looking to maybe change some of your lawn into more friendly habitat, there's some great resources I'll share.
Okay, so this is Michelle. I think we've reached our wonderful sweet time to let our master gardeners return to their gardens. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today on our pollinator discussion with the master gardeners, and we'll see you next week. Can I ask what our topic will be next week? Do we know?
Yes, we are going to be talking about how to take care of your annual flowers and plants. So some really good tips about taking care of specifically the annuals that you have in your gardens or in your yards. And remember, vegetables are annuals too. So will touch on some of those and those annual flowers that you've planted earlier this year. So how to keep them going for the whole summer.
Fabulous. I can't wait. I don't know about you guys, but I'm right there. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week for the Master Gardeners.